Jack Syphers is one of Wheeling's last living trolley car men, and he's here to tell us about his memories. He worked for Wheeling Cooperative Transit Company for 33 years, first as a streetcar motorman, then as a bus driver. In 1972, he was promoted to manager of charter coach department and was automatically put on the board of directors. He also worked for Suburban Bus Lines in Washington, PA as the head of their charter coach company until his retirement. He turned 89 this Sunday, past Sunday, so. Jack Syphers. I'll fix the feedback.
Well, thank you for the invitation to speak, to tell my story, and thank you for coming to hear it. I hope I don't bore you to tears. As has been said, to the best of my knowledge, me and one other fella are the only ones still living that ran the cooperative streetcars. There may be others that worked other lines, but I'm not familiar with them. Now, there are other co-op men still living, but they were after me and drove buses. The other fella still living is August Oglinski. He's presently in Bishop Hodges Wellness Center, sharp as a tack, in spite of his 103 years. He, even in our work, helped to teach me. With that said, I will start my presentation here. It was advertised, and you probably expected to hear stories of the trolley man, and you will. But I want to give a little bit of history in the beginning. While I'm doing it, I do want to give credit to Rebecca Corellis over here for helping me out prepare this presentation. The city of Wheeling, or at least some parts of it, as well as some surrounding areas, including Bridgeport, Bellaire, Martins Ferry, and other villages in both Ohio and West Virginia, have benefited from streetcar rail service since the first horsecar rail service was chartered in Wheeling, Virginia in 1863. During the next 20 years, there was a steady improvement in the types of cars used in the area serviced. Several small railway lines came into being. In fact, there were 12. They serviced parts of eastern Ohio, including Bellaire, Shadyside, Bridgeport, and went north to Martins Ferry, Yorkville, Tiltonville, and Rayland, and west Bridgeport, Lansing, Plain, and Barton. In West Virginia, the lines went north to Warwood and south to Denwood, McMeckin, Glendale, and Moundsville. These 12 small companies eventually combined into the traction company we came to know as the Wheeling Traction Company. In 1901, the Wheeling Traction System was created by the organization of the Wheeling Traction Company, and with the addition of the Panhandle Traction Company, servicing Wellsburg, Fallen Date, Steubenville, Brayton, Mingo, and Mingo Junction. The central hub of this system was what we call the Wheeling Loop, defined as follows. Cars coming into Wheeling from Ohio and Wheeling Island came across the steel bridge. I hope most of you all remember the steel bridge. It doesn't exist anymore, but that was the way the streetcars came in and out. The cars went south on Main Street, east on 14th Street to Market, north on Market to 10th, then back across the bridge. Cars coming from the north traveled south on Main Street to 16th Street or 22nd Street. I'd like to add that about that. If you see these pictures, you'll see there's two gauges of track pictured, a wide gauge and a standard gauge. The Warwood cars and the big panhandle cars were standard gauge. All the others were wide gauge. The high side, south cars were wide gauge. The standard gauge track was turned at 16th Street or 22nd and Market Street. That's the only places those cars could turn around. Now, cars coming from the south traveled north on Market Street to 10th Street, west on 10th to Main Street, and south on Main to all points south. Many of you may remember there was a waiting room ticket office at 10th and Main in what is now I think it's a tavern or cafe. At that time, the West Penn Power Company was ambitious about creating a widespread electric railway system serving and connecting cities and towns in western Pennsylvania, northern West Virginia, and eastern Ohio. And they nearly succeeded. I personally, along with some other cooperative men and led by Bill Gwynn, went on a rail trip in 1955. We boarded a streetcar in Washington, Pennsylvania, went to Pittsburgh, then to Irwin, Pennsylvania, then to Connellsville, Pennsylvania, and then to Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and returned, all without getting off that same car. In October 1912, West Penn Power Company invested $6 million in stock purchases and gained control of the Wheeling Traction Company. In the following 10 years, they invested another $2 million by buying some new cars and laying new track. World War I created a brief spurt in the business. Then the Great Depression of the 20s and 30s caused a serious loss of industry and thereby a serious drop in riders and loss of revenue. Soon the property of the Wheeling Traction Company, represented by the past due 30-year bonds that West Penn had issued in 1901, was faced with receivership. On July 21st, 1933, the property of the Yodeling Traction Company was sold at public auction to the employees of the company, who had organized as a group, calling themselves the Cooperative Transit Company. The group had formed to save their jobs. For $75,000, they bought a system of rail and bus lines, which would have cost $15 million to duplicate at that time. They each pledged up to 10% of their pay toward the purchase price and paid the bill off in 2 years. The purchase included 102 miles of track and the rights-of-way, offices, car barns, and about 100 cars and buses. The Cooperative Transit Company prospered during the 1930s, and then came World War II. Due to industry picking up and rationing, causing a reduction in the use of the private automobile, the mass transit came into demand. At that time, the population of Wheeling was approximately 61,000. The area served by the transit system had approximately 250,000 population. In 1942, the company records showed approximately 18 million passengers were carried. A little over 13 million by streetcars, and a little over 4 million with the buses. At the same time, the company began to lose some of its younger men who were called into the armed forces. That left the older men still there, trying to carry on all the work. And then, the much younger men they were able to hire. That is where I came in. I was just 6 months past 21 years old when I was hired, February 2nd, 1942. And I was immediately called the baby of the outfit. After I was there a few months, I asked the boss if he had hired me to get my services or to keep me from parking that big, red, ugly ice track in front of his office when I went in to ask him for a job. His answer was no. I had to wait until you were legally old enough to operate a commercial passenger vehicle. I worked almost 2 years operating both cars and buses. Then I was called by the Armed Forces and served the last 2 years of World War II in the U.S. Navy. After a brief training in the Atlantic, I served most of those 2 years in the Pacific. I'd like to digress a minute here at this. At one point, the shipmates asked me, "How come you never get seasick?" I said, "Well, that's easy. I had 2 years practice running the streetcar." So you ran a streetcar? Yeah, I was a motorman. Well, we can't have a motorman in this outfit. From here on, you're an electrical engineer. When I came home, I went back to work on the cars and operated them from February of 46 to April of 48, when the last cars were taken off. At that time, I transferred to driving the buses, both local and a nationwide charter service, until 1972. At that time, I was promoted to manager of the charter coach department and to the board of directors, and eventually to secretary of the board. Now, to get to what was advertised, how do you operate a car? First off, I want to say the cars were big, and they could be operated from either end. That's very important because, as you will see later, we had a lot of single track without loops or turnarounds. When the car got to the end of the line, like Radel, Shadyside, or Barton, the operator had to switch ends. I'll explain it later as we go. We only had one run where the operator could stay in the same position all day, and that was the North Island run, the Wheeling North Island. He did a figure eight, a loop situation. He didn't ever have to change ends. Now, to operate the car, the operator had to learn how and when to apply power with the controller for speed, which could range anywhere from 1 mile an hour to 55 mile an hour. I never used that one. And how and when to use the air brake. He had to learn every mile of track, every piece of spatial track, and that includes switch points, the names of all passing switches and sidings, the boundaries of each zone, and what tickets and or cash fare was needed for that zone, make change, punch and issue transfers, give zone checks to the zones the passenger paid for. And to learn all of these things, we had to break in on both day and night terms, both the cars and buses, on all of the divisions the company operated over. The rail system was, for the most part, single track, with passing switches every few miles. Each passing siding had a name. a telephone call box with a direct line to the dispatcher, and a signal light. The name of the switch was very important because when an operator called in, the dispatcher needed to know exactly where he was, especially as that position was related to the other cars running that division and to switches. The switches were given names when they were close to a well-known landmark, such as the park, or Gravel Hill, or Stone Bridge, or sometimes if the switch was near the home of a well-known family, such as Cummins or Higgins, the switch would be so named. They also used stock numbers to number switches. At that time, there was a wicked dam in the Ohio River at the south end of McMecken. And on the high side, the end of the dam was just north of Shadyside. A switch was located just above the end of the dam on the high side, and therefore, it was called the dam switch. In order to maintain a regularly headway schedule, if we were scheduled to pass a car going the opposite direction at a given switch at a given time, we had to be there if humanly possible. I might add, we were required to have good railway quality watches, and when our schedules called for us to meet other cars, say at 5:53, it meant 5:53, not 55, not 54. Of course, we couldn't always do it, but that was our schedule, and we had to try to do it. In order to maintain a regular headway schedule, we were scheduled to pass a car going the opposite direction at a given switch at a given time. We had to be there if humanly possible. Movement over the single track between sidings was controlled by the signal lights. One day, I was headed north out of Shadyside and scheduled to pass a southbound car at a switch. When I got there, there was no car and no red light on the signal block telling me a car was coming. Under these conditions, we were under strict orders to call the dispatcher. This I did as follows. This is Syphers, run number 114 north at the dam switch. No car and light, no light. Do you want me to move up to Headlington switch or wait? I was told to wait. The southbound car did eventually arrive, running very late. The next day, the boss called me into the office, told me that a passenger on my car had called in and reported me for pulling my car onto a sidetrack, made a telephone call to a friend during which I had used very foul language. The boss was a good guy and was laughing while he bawled me out. When I passed through a siding and went on to the beginning of a straight stretch of track, the trolley wire on my trolley wheel on my car made contact with the switch built into the overhead trolley wire, giving me a white light on the signal block to proceed, and at the same time it turned on a red light at the next siding that I would be approaching. That stopped and held back cars going the opposite direction until I was safely passed. When I entered a siding and was faced with a red light, I had to stop and wait until a car going the opposite direction was safely passed. An ideal and smooth running day's work was when all the cars on a division managed to stay on schedule and would meet and pass at the sidings with very little waiting required. I might add that, like on the Wheeling-Blair Shadyside line, there was at least 5 cars spaced 15 minutes apart, proceeding switch to switch. On the Martins Ferry, Brookville, Tilton, Rayland line was usually about 4 cars. and spaced out so they were passing at the various switches. It took quite a job of dispatching and scheduling to arrange all of that and have it work. A lady asked me one day, after watching me with my left hand on the controller and my right hand on the air brake, how in the world could I steer that big car on those skinny rails with that crazy steering wheel? Actually, the question wasn't as dumb as it sounds. We know that the flange car wheels follows rails. However, the overhead trolley bar was not only the source of power to run and give lights, it gave heat to the car, and it did help to steer it. The operator had to watch both rails constantly. A movable switch point was built in, usually on the right side rail. When the car had to turn off the main line and head in another direction, such as off the main line crossing island to go to North Island, or going down Main Street, having to turn off the main line onto 14th, the operator had to control the switch point. The switch control contact point was built into the overhead trolley bar. As the car neared the switch point, and the point was closed, maintaining a straight ahead condition, the operator shut off the power with the controller, which resulted in the trolley wheel coasting through the contact in the overhead wire. If the switch point needed to be changed to steer the car onto a new heading, the operator applied 2 points of power with the controller and at the same time applied a little bit of brake, causing the car to pull as little as the trolley wheel passed the contact point in the overhead wire. This action was called pulling the switch. If the switch point was already set for the way you wanted to go, you had to pull it anyway to keep it there. If the switch point was set against the way you wanted to go, it could be snapped back by coasting under the contact point. In short, the operator had to know every switch on the entire system, which was power, when to pull, or when to coast. These switch points could also be very tricky. They came under the category of spatial work. And, well, you had to be careful pulling them or coasting under. And occasionally a switch point could become defective. It had happened to me one time. I was running what they called the owl trip out of 14th Street Wheeling at 12:40 midnight. I got over to Bridgeport and stopped at the safety zone, had pulled the switch that this owl trip went to Bel Air. I coasted under alongside the safety zone, had the front trucks headed for Bel Air, and people got off, people got on. I pulled the controller around to go to Bel Air, and the front trucks went towards Bel Air, and the back trucks went towards Lansing. Needless to say, neither half went very far. Anyway, there was nobody hurt, nothing like that, but that's what they call splitting the switch, and it did result in a lot of damage to the cars. The cars had a heavy 550 volt electric motor on each axle, and they were wired up in series and in tandem, and as I said before, you could run the car from either end. I think I missed a page here. When the car got to the end of the line, the operator had to get out, pull a trolley pole down, put one up, changed the seats so that you could go down the aisle this way, grab the seats, pull them forward, and they would face the way the car was going to go. And then you carried the fare box from one end to the other. And at nighttime you had to change the clearance lights and the headlights. All those things had to be done, taken care of. And earlier in this message I spoke of the duties, responsibilities of the operator. And at that day and age we worked for the magnificent sum of 65 cents an hour. Which those days wasn't too bad, wasn't too good. Now, I'd like to tell a few stories if you'll bear with me. One day I was running a Benwood car. And if those of you who know the city knows that 22nd Street a little bit steep. The tracks came down Main Street to 22nd and up 22nd, cleared over. I had to stop the traffic light at Chaplin Street. So that meant I really had to give it some power to get from Chaplin to Oak up that hill and around the bend up there. And this I did, and I gave it the power, and all of a sudden the circuit breaker over my head snapped and the sparks flew everywhere and started a fire. There was accumulation of paper stubs and things on the vestibule and it caught fire. Well, at the time, the city had just built a new firehouse at 24th and O Street. And I just let the car drift down to there, and I went in and yelled, "Fire!" The fireman come out. He said, "Boy, I'm used to going to fire. This is the first time I had one talk. Along the same line, had fire on a car one time. I was assigned to run a tripper to Barton, and it took coal miners out to a coal mine halfway between Blaine and Barton, and went on to the end of the line, wiped off the seats, and brought school kids back to Bridgeport. Well, this was bitter cold weather, winter day, early in the morning, and I might add that the power line, after you got past Lansing, the power didn't seem as strong, feeding it in to get you through Blaine and on out to Barton. There was times we had to cut off the heat, some of the lights that had power to run the car. And that was the case that morning. I had the school kids aboard, and back in almost to Blaine, I thought I smelled smoke. Turned around and looked and heard the kids yelling about being cold and build a fire in the middle of the car with a tackle. So I used my extinguisher and put that one out. Then there was one, first I got to admit sometimes a little bit of orneliness in me. I was assigned to a railing run, a late run. And on the way to work I brought my wife and daughter to the island to visit with her mother for the day. And arranged with her to meet me on the 5 o'clock trip with a sack lunch. And she was there when I came across the island about that time. She handed me a brown bag of lunch. And she had made iced tea for me. Couldn't find anything to put it in except a pint whiskey bottle. When I got the railing, I changed the ends and went all through that rigmarole. 2 ladies got on, bought tickets, and sat down in the front seat. And then I started eating my lunch. I'd take a swig in a bottle. In a little bit, I could see him start to fidget. And I kind of, like I said, a little bit of orneliness in me. I teased him for a while. But finally, one lady said, "Myrtle, is this trip really necessary?" Well, I had to leave that bottle under even offer to let them taste it. They stayed on the car and made the trip with me. And there was another occasion on the railing line. It was a dark, cold, drizzly night. And those of you might remember the line in Rayland. Remember that it went up Church Street, and then for the last couple hundred yards, there was a gentle down slope to it. And the track just ended. There was no bumper. No, the track just ended, the trolley wire ended, and there was a street, brick street run this way, past it. And we operators prided ourselves on our skill, which turned out I didn't have. We'd set the brake at the top of the hill, and then we'd start with getting our tickets and changer ready to change in. And all of a sudden I felt all 8 wheels start to slide. They locked up and started to slide. And I dumped my sand, plowed right through it, reached up and hit the reverse bar, and that blew the circuit breaker. And by that time we went off the end of the track across the street. And as I started down the hill, I looked in the mirror and I saw one man starting to get out of his seat. He was the only one left on the car. And when that car stopped, I stopped shaking, turned around and looked. He was holding on to a center pole, and he said, "Boy, you takes me closer home than the other fellas do." So I thought this is the last time I get to run a streetcar. Of course, I had to call in, and the claim agent came up, and the track foreman, and I don't know who all. But they walked to the top of the hill, and then came back and said, "Jack, turn in a report, accident report, but then forget it. There's no trouble." How can that be? What about it? And now to get back to the environment, it was the night before Halloween, a dark, drizzly night, and they found that the kids had greased both rails all the way down the hill, that nobody could have stopped the party. And, well, let's see. One other story I'd like to tell you. When I came home from boot camp, when I was in the Navy, I got on the B&O train at Barberton. Well, it was a series of train rides. I got on the B&O at Barberton, and that was a milk train that stopped at every barn. And I wanted to get on. So in those days, the B&O train came through Kirkwood. It had a stop in Kirkwood. And then it went south to Blair and across that Blair Bridge into Benwood, and then north from Benwood to Wheeling. Into what is now the college. That used to be the B&O terminal. Well, as it came into Kirkwood, I'm getting off of this thing. I've been on it long enough. And me and one other fellow did get off. Just a few minutes along came my old streetcar. This picture of it here, that blue one, the one I had run on the Shady Side line. There it come along, and the operator recognized me right away, and he said, "Hi, Jack, how'd you like to run it over to Wheeling?" I said, oh boy, I'd like that fine. So he let me operate that car from Kirkwood across the island into Wheeling. If you remember, at the end of the steel bridge where it came out on the main street, there was a little dispatcher's shanty there. And that's what we call a street dispatcher, street superintendent, sat in that shanty, trying to keep track of the cars and schedule. So, name was Jay. Jay looked up just in time to see a sailor bringing the Shady Side off the bridge. And of course I stopped at that big safety zone there by M&M, and I watched in the mirror. Here comes Jay down the sidewalk holding his hat and his coattail. And the sailor, bring that car back. So I waited on him, and he got his first foot up on the step and recognized me. And boy, he bawled me out for doing it. And he bawled George out for letting me do it. That's about the end of my stories and Operation Tails. Any questions? Yeah.
When you said the car would turn to go out 14th Street, did it continue on far enough to go down the hill to Macaulay?
No, you're thinking of the Elm Grove line.
Oh.
We had no part of that line, and I know very little. I know that it existed, but I don't know that any of it. Yeah.
Nowadays, the big subway systems like in BC where I used to live are all computer controlled, yet they still have accidents occasionally. There was several people killed in April. You obviously have much lower tech and relying a lot more on the skill of the motorman. Did you ever have any fatalities that you can recall? I mean, generally speaking?
Before my time in the company, there had been a couple of what we call rear-end collisions. And a motorman was killed. One of them happened on that railing line. I might add that from north end of Martin's Ferry to Raylan, it was in open country and what we called open rail. And that was the only place on our system where we dared to open up the car speed-wise and run. I'd go about 50 miles an hour. And they tell me there was a rear-end collision on that line that killed the motorman. But that reminds me of a story, if you bear with me. This has to do with a bus. If you remember, there used to be a little airport at the south end of Yorkville, and there was a little road run from Old Route 7 over to the south end of Market Street, and it went past the head of the airstrip of that little airport. And I was driving the bus, going out that deep run road, and I heard a noise, and I looked, and here come an airplane coming down ready to land. And right away I had visions of how in the world am I going to write this on the accident report. The bus collided with an airplane. Becca's going to help with a few pictures here. I'll try to explain them as we go. Am I in anybody's way? I might say that Augie got a hold of these pictures, passed them on to me and me to Becca. And they're strictly amateur, and please bear with me for the quality. These, one of the parades down Main Street, Christmas parade. There's a streetcar southbound at 12th and Main in the safety zone. I think most of these pictures were made during a Christmas parade day. You left the Market Street, the track up the middle of the street. You see the two rails on one side and one on the other. That's because of the two different gauges we operated with. That's northbound on Market Street.
This is 1940.
How do you do it?
That's good. Whatever you're doing.
While you're watching this, I'll tell you another little story. I was running a Route 71 Martin Ferry car one day, one of these busy parade days in Wheeling, and I got way late. It was a 1 hour round trip run, And I was working as hard as I could work and fretting about being so late trying to make it up. And a lady got on at Hanover Street coming towards Wheeling. And bowled me out for being early. I said, what is going to be? And then I've thought since, they say experience is the best teacher. How I could have used it at that time. She bowled me out for being early. If I'd have dropped back another 10 minutes, I'd have been right on time and probably got a pat on the back for being there. That's old Charlie Marsh, he used to be superintendent of the operators. The bookkeeper, this is the Warwick car barn. After the panhandle cars have been abandoned. That's the office on the island. That location is where, what's the name of that restaurant? Abby's Restaurant over there now. And this particular spot was where was present-day Abby's parking lot. That was across the street from our dispatcher's office, right? The corner building, there's an SO filling station there now. And that car right there is mine. That's the South Yards Street side of one of the barns. Shop man, the front end of the car barn. That fellow there, his name was Robert.
Sorry.
You know, when I had come back from overseas, landed in Long Beach, California, I had always wanted to see Hollywood. So when I got Liberty, I got on a streetcar and went to Hollywood. And I got into a club and ran into a fellow. He was, in fact, a bartender in the club. He moved with jerky motions back and forth. And finally my buddy said, wouldn't you like to be home in Wheeling about now, Jack? I said, oh, nothing I'd like better. And the bartender stopped jerking around. Are you from Wheeling, West Virginia? And I said, yeah, well, what about it? You know a fellow by the name of Goose Stewart? Yeah, he ran a beer joint on 16th Street, and I used to deliver ice to him. And you know a fellow by the name of Fuzzy Roberts? That was the one we saw there a little bit ago. I said, yeah, he's a mechanic where I work. How do you know him? And he said, well, this is the prize fighters club. And I used to be a prize fighter. He said, did you ever hear the name Billy McCann? I said, yeah, I have. And he said, well, I used to fight in a circuit where we hit Canton and Youngstown and places like Wheeling. And he says, and I fought Fuzzy Roberts in your Market Auditorium. So it's a small world. Now this is down in Moundville. You see the streetcar track right at Jefferson Street there. There was a passing switch. Now we're going down that slope that lead to what they call the extension there. North end of Moundville. south on the Narrows. I don't know where that is. This is North Main Street, I believe. We're back on the Narrows now, on north. You notice the track on the left side. And there's the McMacken car barn. Now you're at the start of the Narrows looking south. A lot of that track was built on cribbing that actually hung out over that hillside. That's part of where government cure for seasickness was cured on that. There we're going to get down into Glendale. That is Glendale there. These are operators and mechanics that was probably taken at twice a year we had safety meetings, and actually the insurance company that would give us awards if we had driven or operated without accident, things of that nature. So there's cases here where they're acting like darn fools. And I'm not in the picture because I was working. Fred Allard there. Carl Burkle. Elvis Nicholson. Aunt Cam. Our bookkeeper, Earl McClure, dispatcher, Billy Wilson, operator, Ed Cannon, superintendent. He was a good natured one that bawled me out all the time. The one that hired me. Red light. There's Fuzzy. They say they hired him when he was just a kid and he was so little, they had to build a bench for him so he could get up to the workbench. I don't think we need to see the party bit here. The one we just had there was Bill Gwynn. And I would like to say in Bill's behalf, he had a lot to do with the pictures you see here. It was a hobby of his to take pictures of streetcars and trains. And he really did a job of it. On those occasions when we had the snow and the ice, we had to tie the cow catcher up to keep the snow from tripping them. One way we could keep operating. And I used to pick up overtime at that time. After I'd finished my run, I'd get on the work car with a track man and we'd go over the whole system and put rock salt on the switches. And at the same time, the trolley wheel would be clearing the ice off the trolley wire. We usually shut down the operation was pretty much shut down from 1 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. That was during those hours we'd do that building or repair and maintenance work. There's the office again. It's no longer over there. It's long gone. Charlie Marshall, he retired. At these safety meetings and banquets, it was all food. Absolutely no drink. I want to assure you that. I did have what I thought was a crazy remark one time at a safety meeting. It was made by an Ohio State patrolman. Had been invited to come in and be the speaker. And in the discussion, we were told there was a lot of reports and complaints about buses not pulling all the way into a bus stop, leaving the back end of the bus stick out in the street. And we knew about it, that was a nuisance to traffic. There was nothing we could do about it, because the bus stops weren't all that large where you could swing in all the way. This Ohio State patrolman, believe it or not, said, "Why can't you pull forward to the middle of the street and back into the stop?" Our safety agent got up and says, "There's the door, mister." And he left. That was the dumbest thing I ever saw. That it? Well, that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Yodeling Dick here to tell you about a happening. Lunch with books. Lunch with books has cooksy, cooksy, hacksy, cracksy, yells and sings, rocks and swings with more and more. Lunch with books. Lunch with books. At the Ohio County Public Library in Wheeling, West Virginia. It'll make you feel like yodeling. Hey, yodie, 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 hey, yodie, yodie, take away. Mostly on Tuesdays at noon. Bring your lunch, we'll provide the pot. And it's all free. Lunch with books. is served.